They might, and there might be a couple from Sydney that I invited too. Can you remember those numbers, please, David? You're getting better at that? Good. Thank you very much. So that brings us to the fun bit of tonight. So we would like to welcome Michelle Howie from SA Power Networks, who is going to try and answer all these questions for us. And perhaps some other ones you may have as well. So welcome, Michelle. Thank you.
Oh, can I take that off? No. Okay. Yeah? Oh gosh, first test. Got it. Hi everyone, good evening. I think it's been a while since someone from SA Power Networks came through and said hi, so I'm very privileged to be here tonight and excited to be with you. Bruce gave me a list of all the things that you guys might ask or might be interested in. We won't be able to cover everything tonight, but I would like you to take the opportunity to ask me anything. I've only been at SA Power Networks about 18 months, which in SA Power Networks terms is still a newbie. But I'm happy to take all questions and perhaps we can answer them and send them out later. But I would like to hear from this audience today. Sorry if you're online, you don't get to input. Which of these sound the most exciting to you? What should we make sure we cover tonight? Vehicle to grid? Yep. Charges on poles. They're the two top. Yeah, okay, yep. VPPs, definitely. A virtual power plant. So that one we're going to get to. Good one. All right. Next question I'll ask you is, being from SA Power Networks, what do you think are the big opportunities and all the best case scenarios for EV uptake in South Australia? What do you think we're really excited about? Storage, yep. Yes, yep, absolutely. More clean energy being used. Anyone else? Being world leaders? I wouldn't say we're world leaders in EVs at the moment, unfortunately, but we're getting there. Yep. Yes, exactly. Soaking up that excess solar generation, which we are world leaders in. Good point. Grid services, yep. So there's all these great exciting things that we're expecting EVs to bring to the grid. What do you think are some of the worst case scenarios that we're potentially trying to avoid or mitigate? Everyone plugging in at the same time, in the same place, and charging at high speeds at the same time. So that is definitely a risk that we're trying to mitigate, but absolutely a part of my job as a future networks engineer at SA Power Networks is to also look at the best case scenario and try and make sure we're moving towards the best case scenario while we're trying to avoid the worst case scenario. So I want to take you on a little bit of a journey before we get to the EV stuff. This is an overview of the South Australian energy electricity system. And we are here as a distribution network at SA Power Networks. So traditionally, we would show this graph, this map, and most generation was centralised. So you have power stations. Even in solar and wind, they're still highly centralised and sort of out in the regions. And power then is brought through the transmission lines into where people are using it. That's where we come in the low voltage network. It's the retailer's job, is sort of a virtual stakeholder here to buy and sell electricity to the end users. And then we are the ones that deliver it over the poles and wires, right? But one thing that's changed a lot in the last 15 years or so is all of this generation and storage has moved from being completely centralised to being mostly decentralised. So the storage is actually moving onto the customer premises with things like rooftop solar and batteries. South Australia is actually the world leader in uptake of rooftop solar. So we have the highest number of solar panels per person in the world, although the rest of the country is catching up, but that's okay. We'll let them. Our transition to renewables has been incredibly rapid. In 2005, almost all of the generation in South Australia was coal and gas and some other like diesel, etc. Fast forward to last year, I haven't got the latest numbers, but last year it was 75% of our generation was from wind and solar, right? The state government's targets for 100% net renewable energy was 2030, and they recently proposed to bring that forward to 2027, and they're well on track to meeting that, which is very exciting. Another, I guess, trend that's impacting the energy system at the moment is rapid electrification. So transport is a big one, electrifying transport, not just cars, of course, but buses and everything else, as well as electrification in homes and businesses. What are some of the other examples of electrification other than transport that we're seeing? Cooktops, yep. Planes could be, yeah, we have like small electric planes, yep. South Australia is actually leading in that too. Heat pumps, yep, so heating and cooling, electrifying away from gas and oil and things like that. So there's many opportunities for electrification, but what that's meaning is that the distribution network, so our network is carrying far more load and generation than in the past. What actually got me really passionate about this work here is hearing the stat that South SA Power Networks is fast becoming the largest fuel provider in the state, right? So when you have electric vehicles, they're powered by electricity, and a lot of them are going to be plugged in on the low voltage, our network. So we have a changing in our responsibility, which is why we really care and really involved in the transition as much as possible. Actually, so we talked about some of the challenges and opportunities. Some of the challenges being everyone plugging in at the same time in the same place and charging. Some of the opportunities being soaking up all of the solar in the middle of the day. How are some of the ways you think that we can make that easier for people to do? Or how can we incentivize or make sure that that future is the best case? Yeah? Pricing, right. So things like time of use tariffs potentially, making it cheaper in the middle of the day. Another thing I was really surprised about when I started working here is just realizing that even if I don't have solar panels on my home, if I'm renting or in an apartment or just don't have solar panels, I'm still using solar because South Australia's grid in the middle of the day is pumped full of solar from everyone else's roofs. So that's a good thing, and then we can make prices cheaper in the middle of the day, so even if you don't have solar, you can access cheaper wholesale pricing. That's one thing. Yep. So the stat I have is 44% of roofs have solar on them. It depends what time of day it is. So sometimes more than 100% of the grid is powered by rooftop solar. More than 100%. How can we get more than 100%? Yep, export where? Interstate, so through the interconnectors. So all our excess solar we've been exporting to Victoria, right? But why do you think that's becoming a challenge? They're putting in solar. So if the supply and demand isn't matching, that's when it becomes a challenge because that solar has to go somewhere. So to keep the grid stable, you can't have a mismatch of supply and demand. So can't answer your question exactly, but at some times of day, it's more than 100%. Yep. It can go into storage, absolutely. So what do you think are some of the options for storage to soak up that solar, so to speak? EVs is one, right? So at a very local level, if you have excess solar, you can use that to charge your home battery. Same like on a street, not a home battery, an EV and or a home battery, right? If it's your street that might have excess solar, you could put sort of a neighbourhood battery, community battery to soak that up. If it's at a grid scale, so before it gets exported to Melbourne, there's opportunities to have large grid batteries. But think about it, if there's too much solar here, right? Putting a battery over here is not necessarily going to help in all cases because the congestion is actually occurring over there. So we definitely need a mix. The answer is always yes, and we need all of it. What's another, I guess, risk or challenge, or why wouldn't we want to just put batteries everywhere? Too expensive? Perfect. Anything else? Yes, so you might install something and then it might be replaced by something more efficient in the future. Anything else? Yep, longevity, and you have to replace them every so often. Also, the sustainability as well. You have to have a lot of components in the batteries. I've seen some really cool examples of actually second life EV batteries being used for stationary storage, because even if they maybe only get 80% state of charge or they discharge too quickly and they might not be suitable for a car anymore, they can still be put. Imagine you get a bunch of them one of them in your home is actually 3 to 10 times bigger than a normal home battery. So if you're thinking about those power walls, they're 10 to 15 kilowatt hours, but an EV battery is 40 to 80 kilowatt hours, right? So you can reuse them. So batteries are a solution for sure. What's another thing we can do? So we talked about tariffs, we talked about some storage. Yep. Sorry? Induction charging, so not having them plugged in, but I was in South Korea and I was in a bus that was doing that, which was pretty cool. So getting people to shift their usage into the middle of the day is what's really going to help. So sort of using it before you export it is probably the best way to put it, self-consumption. So how do we do that? You said tariffs. Yep. Exactly. Perfect. So I was going to say, why might people not charge in the middle of the day because they're not at home, and lots of people prefer to plug in at home if they can. So how do we support that? Well, for us, we can make sure that it's easier for businesses to connect EV chargers in the workplace. There's many ways we can do that and are looking to do that as well, because it is a really big addition to their load. So if you imagine, I don't know, like a normal office building, a big office building, adding a few EV chargers might not be a big deal, but if it's a small office, adding a few EV chargers could potentially double the load and their demand on the network, and that can be expensive, timely, and things like that. So we're looking at ways to try and make that a bit easier and more accessible. So making it cheaper, making it more accessible to charge in the middle of the day. Also, very simply just telling people about it. Like I said, when I started at SA Power Networks, just learning all these things, like, you mean even if I plug in and I don't have solar panels, it's still using solar? Like, wait, are you telling me that it's cheaper in the middle of the day? Like, sometimes if people just know, and they know that they're going to be using very likely 100% renewables in the middle of the day versus in the evening, our electricity is not coming from solar. Where is it coming from in South Australia? Wind, absolutely. So wind is actually our biggest, if you look over the year, we had 75% renewables. Most of that is from wind, because even though we have more solar, the solar is only from like 10 till 4, in general, but the wind can happen at any time. Although we are seeing that because often, especially in spring, where it's very sunny, no one's got their air cons on, so it's a very low demand, there's so much solar that it's requiring wind farms to turn off because there's so much solar on the grid. Yeah. So obviously people are being a bit smarter and putting in batteries, but it's not, like, curtailing is a feature, not a bug of the system. If you think, I heard a really great stat yesterday that we don't try and capture every single bit of rain that drops on the ground, right? We capture as much as we can and we use it. The more the better, but we don't worry about rain that's falling and we're not capturing it. So I think we need to kind of change the way we think about solar as well, because we actually in South Australia are one of only 2 countries that are starting to see this kind of challenge. 2 grids in the world, we're not a country, but South Australia and Denmark are starting to see that challenge. And so we are kind of at the forefront globally of seeing how we deal with that in a smart way. So you can make it cheaper, make it more accessible, tell people about it. What about some of your charging patterns? Like, how do you make sure you're getting the cheapest price for electricity with your charger? Yep. Yes. Yep. Yes. Amazing. That's the retail prices is good. And do you set your alarm for midnight and wake up and plug your charger in at midnight? So it's the technology. So whether it's in the car, whether you have maybe a physical box or an app or some sort of software, that's something that can make cheaper and more renewable charging more accessible. Like I said, charging overnight is sometimes a cheaper way to do it, but middle of the day is where we're soaking up that extra solar, which is becoming the challenge. So making it easier for people to do that is really key. And yes? Ah, there you go. So the solar sponge, we call that. Yeah. That's, and with tariffs, it's quite interesting because we set the price for the retailers, back to this graph. So SA Power Networks charges the retailer, and it's up to your retailer, whoever you're with, to set that price for you. So our price does make up a component of that, but in the end, the retailer, you have dozens of retailers in the market that will have different offers. Yeah, that's how they do it. Is anyone here with Amber Electric? Yes? Yeah? What makes them different? Yes. So it's a dynamic price. So if you, yeah. I shouldn't have said their name. I'm not here to promote them, but that's the example of another retailer that has a different kind of tariff. If you can schedule your charging and change your behaviour, that is sometimes a good option. If you don't have as much flexibility, sometimes it's better to be on a tariff that's more predictable. So anyway, I've only gone 2 slides in and I've almost used my whole time. That's okay, doesn't matter. Let's see. Now, people often ask me about stats for EVs. So I rely on state government statistics or federal government statistics or the EV Council statistics. So I don't have statistics of my own. But from what I've heard, there's about 10,000 EVs on the road in SA. Does that sound about right? Yeah? We have data about sort of how many chargers there are, because that's important to us. About 3,000 home chargers, the plug-in home chargers. And there's about just over 100 public chargers that we're aware of. That doesn't count if your business has an EV charger or if your hotel has one. This is like the public accessible ones. But the state government in South Australia has projected that by 2040, 100% of all new car sales will be EVs. That doesn't mean that all all cars on the road will be EV, but certainly 100% of new sales will be. And my focus is not just on passenger vehicles, on private vehicles, it's also on the other transport, heavy transport, trucks, buses, and everything like that. It's just that because of the nature of our network being in the low voltage poles and wires, it's mostly residential and small business that we deal with. But in saying that, the fast chargers have been a very interesting journey. What's the question?
Well, the question is about managing the demand, and then the installers and the networks have issues with the pricing, the demand pricing for that odd, very high peak cost.
Yes. All I'll say is stay tuned in February next year when we'll have more announcements on that. But yeah, we set our prices based on the Australian Energy Regulator. And so it's sort of a nationally regulated system. And all networks around the country go through that process, but they all have different nuances around it. So good question. So the NEM is the National Electricity Market, and that refers to, if you have picture a map of Australia, South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, some of Queensland and Tasmania are all interconnected. So like I said, we can export excess South Australian power to Victoria. We're building an interconnector to New South Wales. That is collectively the NEM. And then you have the WEM, the Western Electricity Market. Yeah. So, and then Northern Territory is made up of a bunch of islanded grids that aren't connected to each other. So they have their own challenges as well. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and of course, SA Power Networks doesn't cover the whole state either. So yeah, that's for another time, I think. So getting to more of the good stuff. I've been thinking a lot about what our role is in the EV transition. So here's one sentence we've been playing around with, that SAPN, SA Power Networks, empowers South Australians to transition to electric transport by enabling the connection and operation of charging options. So the grid connectivity, the charging, is really where we can play a big role. And we want those charging options to maximise energy security. So we talked about EVs helping grid stability, helping affordability. So if we avoid having to add to the peaks, if we have all the EVs charging at peak time, we're going to have to upgrade the network to pay for that increase, and that cost will be passed on to customers as well. But if we can avoid that, then we can have more and more EVs charging in the middle of the day without having to upgrade the network because of them. And of course renewables, so soaking up all that solar and wind and other clean generation. And what is kind of expected of us is we talked about issues with connecting. So if some of the main barriers for EV uptake is range anxiety, people not being aware of charging options or not seeing charging options or not having accessible charging. And so we're trying to address that by making it easier to connect the chargers. So that's how we're sort of playing our role there. And all the other exciting things that we'll get to. I'll skip that. I'll just pause by saying on our website, I've started putting up a few resources for drivers, tips about charging at home. So all the things we talked about, having a look, trying to charge outside of peak times, getting a good electricity tariff that suits your needs, trying to use solar, using a smart charger that can schedule your timing. So if you have anyone curious, you can send them to here on our website. I'll skip we talked about tariffs. And this is for installers. So if any of you in your communities or in your organisations are interested in EV charging installations, I've started putting up some content that should help the process. So initially we thought, well, it's just the same as any other connection. They could just go to our connection process. And largely it is, but I think there are some nuances that we can help with. Like for example, when RAA was rolling out the EV charging network across South Australia, it's not really a normal connection because they're not asking for one site. They were asking for 170 sites across the state at the same time. So we've been trying to update our processes to deal with that. One of the key things about public charging is people often think the fastest charger is the best option. So like, let's go ahead and put, what's the maximum, 350 kilowatts, let's put a big charger like that. Why do you think that might not be the case? Yep. Correct. So not all chargers can charge that fast. That makes a lot of sense, having a 200 kilowatt charging bay if there are multiple plugs and then cars that come in can share it. I don't want to explain things you already know, but if you plug in an empty EV, it will charge pretty fast at the start and then it will start tapering off to save battery life. That's another thing is battery life, like charging your car at the fastest speed every time is not going to be too good for your battery. When do you think is the right time to use a fast charger? When's it good? Yep, absolutely. Yep, so when you just quickly, you're on the way somewhere, right? But if you're day-to-day charging, it's probably not the best option. So it's fair enough to assume that straight away, but we're just trying to, create more awareness out there by saying if people are asking for this, if you want a cheaper, quicker connection, maybe rethink your charging needs. But I will get to the point where we talk about what about people that can't charge at home. So me, for example, I do own my own home. It is not an apartment, it's a home, but my garden is all around the house and nowhere near the car park. And so I park on the street or in my driveway and I can't put an extension cord out on my street. So where can I go? I have to go to like public chargers. And that becomes a bit of a challenge. Okay. We talked about okay, great. We talked about virtual power plants. Do one of you want to explain what a virtual power plant is? You said it.
Okay, so it's a collection of distributed energy resources that can be orchestrated to put energy onto the grid or locally as required.
I'm glad I asked. So that is a perfect, I'm sorry I didn't have the microphone there, but yeah. So if you think about, if you have a home battery, right, and you can use that to power your home or use it to soak up your solar and use it later, what if we have a bunch of batteries all across South Australia and the energy market operator, AEMO, decides, we actually need like the batteries to respond and take some load. What the virtual power plant does is treats all of those batteries like one big battery and can ask them to charge or discharge at the same time or whatever time based on needs in that area. It might not be at the same time, it could be like locational, but that's the concept. Does anyone here have a home battery? Yep. Anyone on a virtual power plant? Yes? What's your experiences like with it?
When you look at the logs from the batteries, consumption and export data, you'll see these little spikes every now and then where the Tesla VPP has come in and said, hey, I need a bit. And all of a sudden the battery's discharging flat out for 3 or 4 minutes and then settles down and goes back to what it's doing.
Yeah. And does that bother you?
Not at all.
Yeah.
It hardly ever hits into the capacity. I have a friend who was paranoid about when his battery went online. And I kept saying to him, he'll not even notice. And it took months of grass to convince him. I still don't think he's actually doing it.
And that's okay too. It's definitely optional, but if you join, you will get extra benefits. So would they pay you like a subscription or something? Yeah. Yeah, so they pay you for that, the privilege of having access to your battery for sometimes. And there's usually thresholds that you set that you can't you don't let it go below a certain amount and whatever. Yeah, there you go. And then I think the last number I heard was 18 different virtual power plant options across South Australia at the moment. So there's a lot of, and South Australia and SA Power Networks was working with Tesla for one of the world's first virtual power plants back in 2017. So the team that I work in is the Energy Transition Network Strategy team. And the interesting thing at SA Power Networks and why I love working here, even though I'm from South Australia, I moved back in order to work at SA Power Networks because I was just hearing about all of the world-leading renewable projects that are happening here. I talked a lot about our world-leading uptake in solar, And that has led to some world-leading technologies and policies for managing solar, as well as world-leading uptake in home batteries and virtual power plants and things like that. Another example, we talked about grid batteries before. I don't know if you remember the big hoo-ha about the Hornsdale battery a few years ago, which was, the biggest battery in the country at the time. I think the biggest battery in the Southern Hemisphere, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, exactly. And everyone said, oh, it can't be done, like, this is crazy, this is too big, never been done. And then now that's a small size battery compared to other grid-sized battery around the country. So we're doing a good job here, definitely. Okay, we talked about virtual power plants. What we're piloting at the moment is a trial that's currently open for registration. So I'll do a bit of a promo about the Energy Masters program that SA Power Networks has just launched in partnership with the federal government and the state government and a few other key partners. And the idea is trying to help automate this orchestration to shift demand from residential into the middle of the day or whenever is most appropriate based on your needs. So the program, you don't have to have solar, you don't have to have a battery, you don't have to have an EV, but all of those things are good if you're on the program. It's also helping the participants access electrification as well, so giving subsidies, I think up to 90% subsidies for some electrical appliances. So this is what it is. Here's our partners. I will send the information out, but it's saenergymasters.com.au. So it's a home energy management trial. So we're working with our partners to create the technology to actually do this, but also more importantly, testing how people respond to it. Like, does it make sense? Are they happy? Do they have any questions? Are we giving enough dollars and cents to reward? Are we giving enough information up front? I'll keep going through because this shows up on other slides. Yeah, it would have opened, I think we had it open for at least 2 months just to allow enough people to apply because we're recruiting for 500 homes. The applications close on the 2nd of December, so after that is when we'll start shortlisting participants. And if you apply and you don't get selected, don't be offended. It's often to do with the compatibility of the equipment that you might have or might be interested in getting. I won't talk too much more about it, but it is all about, if you have a fully electric home, it's not that complex, but you get a lot of value. As you start wanting to access more rewards like virtual power plants and getting rewarded for shifting your usage, then it gets a bit more complicated, and that's where this technology is trying to come in. So it's an 18-month research program. All right, I will keep moving. I might move past this. If the question comes up, I'll talk about it. Okay, that's Energy Masters. Vehicle to grid. Okay, what does vehicle to grid mean? Yes.
We've been trying to set it up in a local hall for a recovery centre for fires. And basically we found a flood system, but then that was thrown out by the federal government. So we're still waiting. What's going to happen? Apparently we're still trying to sort it out.
And what is the use case for vehicle to grid?
Sorry?
What is it for? What does it do?
Oh, well, this is a recovery centre. Sorry.
Thank you.
This is a recovery for bushfires and things in the Adelaide Hills, which I've just left. And we've got a command centre for the CFS, $10,000 whatever dollars worth of generator to keep that place going. We're turning our hall into totally. Uradler's got a reputation for doing everything recyclable and whatever you want to call it. And we have got solar panels. We want to have vehicle to grid so that when a bushfire goes through, the power goes off, thanks to you guys. It'll switch it off usually within about 24 hours. And we need, if that's being used, we need to run this recovery centre and we plan to use car batteries. However, I think the Nissan is the only one that fits at the moment. So are there plans by the federal government to insist that this becomes part of or an option when you buy an electric vehicle?
Absolutely. So I'll take a few steps back and then I'll answer your question. So the concept of vehicle to grid, this sounds like a vehicle to building, like vehicle to home, is taking discharging the car battery into a building and then exporting that into the grid for vehicle to grid. So vehicle to grid / vehicle to building. That is not available in all cars, and there's only one charger in Australia that can actually do that. I will talk a bit about more about what vehicle to grid is, and then I'll answer some of those questions. I actually got back from Canberra last week, where the federal government ran a workshop about how we bring vehicle to grid to Australia, like how we accelerate the adoption of vehicle to grid, identifying what some of the barriers are, and then going deeper to be like how we're addressing those barriers, and then going even deeper, what needs to happen first. Because as you'll see, it's a bit of a chicken and an egg situation here. So we got, I think it was up to 50 people from around the country in the room to talk about, okay, let's just get started somewhere. So this is an example setup. So the car will, oh, hello, what's going on? Okay, the car will just charge its battery into an inverter. If there is demand in the home, so say you're running your air conditioner or your electric cooktop, then the power from the car, just like a home battery, will be used to power the home. If it's grid connected, it can then export to the grid in the same way that solar and batteries do today. Actually, SA Power Networks is the only network in Australia that currently allows vehicle to grid to be installed outside of a trial. So the vehicle to grid is actually, there's more examples interstate, but they're all under closed trials, I would say. Yes, that's what it is. Okay, here are some of the ingredients to get a vehicle to grid. First, you need a car that is capable. So there's a few different barriers here. Like Australia generally is a difficult market for vehicles. We drive on the other side of the road, we're far away, there's not that many people here, we have very specific preferences for cars, that gets in the way of our EV transition sometimes. And so, so that is part of the challenge. It's not the whole answer, but that's part of the challenge, is having vehicle to grid ready vehicles. Having an EVSE is the electric vehicle supply equipment, the EV charger itself needs to be bidirectional capable. Now in Australia we have specific grid codes. This is not an SA Power Networks thing, but like a National Standards Australia grid codes, and they're different from other parts of the world. Even though they're based on international standards, they're a bit different. So if you are an EV charger manufacturer and you're going to have to pay software developers to understand and then implement Australia-specific standards, we don't have vehicle-to-grid cars on the road, and we don't have that many EVs in general compared to other countries. That's becoming a barrier already because of the international market saying, well, when you guys are ready and got your act sorted, then we'll start doing it. So that was part of the federal government program last week, to kind of get everyone in the same room and do a bit of a push for that. Then when they do that, they have to get certified. So they need a test centre where they need to go and take their charger in their car to go and get it tested and ticked and certified. Then it will be listed on a national website, and then all of us from the network say, well, if it's on the website, then you can install it, it's all good. So that's some of the challenges, but rest assured it's definitely a priority for Australia at the moment to try and get this happening. Nissan Leafs are one of only, I think, 3 cars I'm aware of that currently are vehicle to grid capable. The other one is the Mitsubishi plug-in hybrid. The Outlander, yes. Yes, the Outlander, yep. But they both have, which one? Yes. So the difference is that the Nissan Leaf and the Mitsubishi Outlander, they have the old charging plug. So you guys know the CHAdeMO plug, yep. But that's sort of being phased out, not officially, but it's just being phased out. Yeah, it's being, for the CCS plugs. So I mentioned there's one bidirectional charger available in Australia. It's no longer on sale, but it was. It has a CHAdeMO plug. So we're now, and I've, and small batteries, yes, not very meaningful. It's when you get those 60 kilowatt hour batteries plus, that'll be really meaningful. So, but it is coming because, there's definitely a bit of a movement around vehicle to grid in Australia because of all the solar that we have. Yeah. So the standards, right, are being ratified as we speak. I think in February the standards will be published, and then international manufacturers of these can certify their products to it. The standards are published now, so people can start building their products towards those standards. So, but then it's, again, we have to kind of be a bit more promotional, I would say, like saying, hey, Australia's ready, make products, we want them, look at how many EVs we have and how many vehicle-to-grid cars we want. So, yeah, I will come back to you next year. I'll come to one of these sessions and give you an update.
So that program you mentioned before about trialing and stuff, is there anything in that with bidirectional EVSE that you can trial?
Oh yeah, the Energy Masters. Yes, yes. Not in this program because there aren't any chargers. If there was an EV charger that was compatible, we'd absolutely have it in the program. Yes, absolutely. So the one charger I was mentioning is about 8 times more expensive than a normal charger, right? That's not scalable, not accessible. I guess the nature of it was there's many things, supply and demand. If you're the only one on the market, you can set your price. But also that cost was reflective of all the effort that it took to build to Australian standards and get certified to Australian standards. So yeah, there is a bit of a mix, a bit of a trade-off when we have a grid that is dominated by variable renewable energy, especially distributed renewables. Like I said, it's not like even in Denmark, they have a lot of solar and wind, but they have centralized solar and wind. So it's much more easy to manage, whereas we have to kind of balance solar that in people's homes and businesses and yeah, in Australia. Anyway, yes.
Is that where the microgrid comes in to balance things at the local level as opposed to across the board?
Yeah, yeah. I would say we need all the solutions. So behind the meter optimization is kind of what Energy Masters is about. It means fitting more and more electrified loads in, fitting more and more generation in without having to upgrade the fuse of your home. So essentially what we do today is you sort of add up all of the load that you have in your house, and that's how big your fuse should be. But in the future, because we have generation and storage within the same building, you don't have to size it that big because you're going to assume that you won't have your EV charging at the same time as your cooktop. And if you do, maybe you have a battery that's discharging it. So maybe not microgrid, but definitely coordinating the resources that you have to be better optimized. Because in that scenario, you would have to then upgrade your supply, which would cost you money, would cost us money. Better to fit more in, before you build more, just use what you've got.
Is it possible that also for the DC fast charging solutions we were talking about earlier, that maybe the fast ones or the fastest ones you want on highways, which is predominantly going to be in areas where the grid supply may be weak, you would put localized batteries to support the peak loads and the temporary charging, and then that just gets topped up on the trickle whilst everyone's driving past it if they don't currently need it.
Yes. So I will say that we don't install the fast chargers. It's the charge point operators like RAA and RMA, but they are definitely using those battery-backed solutions. So there's a fast DC charger that got a lot of attention in the media because it had a diesel generator, right? But that's one of those clickbait things. It was a fast charger with a battery. The battery was charged by solar, so they had solar on site charging the battery. So if there's not enough grid supply at that time, it will use the battery, it will use the solar, and then if last resort is diesel. I don't have the stats on how often that was or wasn't used, but yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's similar in South Australia. You know, we have an abundance of wind and solar most of the time, and then sometimes when there's a shortfall, that's when peaking gas is coming in, and then absolutely extreme cases, there's some diesel generation in the state as well. So it's 75% wind and solar, 100% net renewable. If you have to have a bit of backup here and there, it's not the absolute worst thing. Very good question. Backing up load with generation is a really key part, which also makes things more complicated. So that's okay. Yes?
How important are home smart meters to this process?
So with the Energy Masters program, you have to have a smart meter to participate because that gives more real-time data on your energy usage. So accumulation meters, so the meters that sort of you get the accumulated amount of energy used rather than point in time. You can't then access things like time of use tariffs. So it's still a choice. So you could stay on your accumulation meter, but you won't be able to access that cheap pricing in the middle of the day. Our tariffs are built, I have a slide, but I won't bring it up. Our tariffs are built so that the default time of use tariff, if used in the default standard way, it should be the same price overall. We also have time of use tariffs that are a bit more peaky. So the peak might be higher, but the cheap part is a lot cheaper. And so if you can shift your usage, you might opt in for one of those tariffs that you get a better benefit from. So that's where smart meters come in. There is a push nationally to, I think they're aiming for 100% of homes have smart meters by 2030. I'm not totally across that. I think in South Australia it's about 50% at the moment of homes with smart meters. So, yeah. I changed over to a smart meter when we got solar. So, yeah, good question. I wanted to finish off with talking a bit about curbside charging, so charging on SOBI poles. So this is some notes from my colleague who is the expert in this space. We believe curbside charging will be an important component of public charging in the future, but at the moment it's largely cost prohibitive. So it's possible, we have processes for it, but it's too expensive for people to actually do it. However, we're working at a national level to minimise the costs and make the process a bit easier. So that's something we work on in the background. And we're hoping by next year we'll have chargers on poles, even if it's in a trial, but we're hoping to see that next year. Yep. Or it's the order of magnitude of 10,000 to 20,000. It's like, yeah, yep, yeah. Again, it's the supply and demand scenario where there isn't a standard setup for the EV chargers on poles, so anyone doing it is kind of the only one, or like one of few doing it. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
These will be on the poles. Oh, here we go. Maybe I need this. These will be on all the parking poles because my daughter lives in Norway, in Oslo. So it's very commonplace there. Like there's underground car parks, there's just charging points on every parking bay. The street, they're doubled up. They can park facing either way, which is fun. And it's really commonplace, obviously.
Well,
really.
Otherwise they can access the charging
Yeah,
points.
whichever way. There's no penalty, whereas we're stung if we park the wrong way around to make the cable reach. It's interesting and it's fun. But I always thought it would be cool, and I don't know if you can do this, if you could come to a street pole, plug your car in, but tap your card so the payment went onto your home electricity bill or something like that kind of thing. Is that just daydreaming? Or
No, that's called e-roaming.
Yep.
And so there are international sort of trials in that space. I think if I go back to the vehicle to grid conversation, I had that slide where there's all these challenges in vehicle to grid, right? And it seems too hard and everyone's like, oh, but I can't do this until something else happens. What we're trying to do now is come together so that at one point, one thing will unlock and then the rest will unlock, and before you know it, they're going to be everywhere. So a lot of cars, I'm suspecting a lot of cars on the road now, a lot of EVs, can be capable of vehicle to grid, just with either a software upgrade or maybe the next model will be vehicle to grid. It's not really that hard. It's just all of these pieces fitting together. And I think things like charging on poles, we've been really pushing for it and finding all these different challenges along the way. But now we're at a stage in the last 12 months, we've been partnering with Mitcham City Council. And also I've been working with my colleagues in New South Wales where they have a lot of chargers on poles in trial. Collectively, we've been identifying all the different challenges and raising them to the right people. And then I feel like at one point something's going to click and then it's all going to work and be great. So that's our goal for next year. Yes?
AGL have just announced today inner Sydney and outer Sydney districts free charging from pole. It's just been released.
How many poles have they got?
149.
Yes. Yeah. I was on a call this morning with like the national working group on this. A lot of it comes down to who's paying for the poles. So it could be state government funded, could be federal funded. It is, yeah. So there you go. We're trying to push different avenues to get it funded. So yeah, definitely. And that's so key at the beginning to get it started, to prove the technology, to get a critical mass, to be able to bring the price down for everyone else. Yep.
Slightly related, but curbside.
Yes.
I get a lot of questions from people who, like you, can't easily get their car off the street, or they have to have a really long extension cable through the front garden or whatever. Not that none of us have ever done that, of course, but not across the footpath. And a lot of the questions are, and it's to do with my local council doesn't want me to tunnel under the footpath so I can have a curbside charger outside my house in a quiet residential street where parking is not a problem. Like obviously where there's, 2-hour limit parking and it's very busy, you couldn't necessarily use your own charger, but you could possibly, let other people do it and they have to pay for it. Have you got a view on that? Is it like a building regulation, or where is that going to work? Because there is a case for that too.
I've seen councils doing this trial, Port somewhere, I don't know, maybe Port Macquarie, but councils doing a trial with this somewhere where the resident pays for a little like a pop-out charger, but that was also cost prohibitive because the council needs to recoup the cost of trenching and digging and the electrical cables and things like that. But I think it is, like as you said, you fund a few of them and that starts bringing the cost down. So I think that's not out of the question. What I would say, and this is like not really SA Power Network's position, but what I've seen in the literature is that some councils and some across the world are sometimes hesitant to do too much infrastructure too early when they're kind of like, well, we're not quite sure how this is going to work. I think Australia isn't completely unique. I think we can learn a lot from places. Norway's a great example where they don't have a massive population. So us not having a massive population is not a real excuse for us not having a lot of cars available. It's quite easy to make, it's quite easy to use the case both ways. So, oh, we're so different, this is why we don't have it. But also, yeah, not good enough. But okay. There was a question. Yeah.
I'll speak loudly, saving the hassle.
That's for the video.
One of the questions with this power charges on poles, are they single phase or are they going to go right through to three phase?
It can be either. It's depending on whoever chooses what they choose to install. Yeah. Sorry?
It has to be an overnight stop to charge up.
Yeah, so I don't know about you guys and your charging behaviour, but there's a real shift in not letting your car get to zero and then wanting to charge it up fully again. It's definitely, you don't need to plug in when you're empty. You can plug in more often and have a shorter charge. So the Mitcham City Council did a lot of research about the use case for charging on poles, and it was a people that opportunistic charging, let's call it. So I'm at the coffee shop, there's a charger there, I'm on 60%, might as well plug in, it'll get me to 10% more or whatever. And they did a lot of studies on willingness to pay, like how much they would pay for that. And we kind of landed that this is probably the sweet spot for the curbside charging model, where it has to be cheaper than a fast charge because you're not getting the convenience of like an immediate charge. Cheaper than that, yeah. And it would be more expensive than charging at home because at home you already have the infrastructure and things like that. And there's that costs a bit more. Yes?
20 kilowatts are really good if you want to go shopping. It's too fast. And you've got to go back and grab it, otherwise you get fined for being there when it's full.
Yes. Yeah.
So 20 kilowatts is really good. The other point I want to make is I've just come back from Victoria and we've been doing this opportunity charging. My wife's quite slight and she cannot remove the cable. This is a micro issue, not a macro issue. She just cannot lift the charging cable onto the car. At home, 2.4 kilowatt, no problem. But out there, when you get out to the 200, 250 kilowatt ones, they're just too heavy for her to lift.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and it comes back to like accessibility of public charging. And I did want to do a shout out to the RAA Charging Network because they actually just won your charging station of the year, right? Yeah, I was so proud to see that. And my understanding is that like it was much more accessible, friendly with all the different amenities and things like that. So another thing to think about with EV charging, and I've seen literature from other councils around the world, that you shouldn't underestimate the visual amenity and the accessibility of the charging too. Charging on poles, again, could be done today, but it requires a lot of different boxes because of all these different regulations. So we've been, advocating nationally to remove some of the barriers to make it easier, not have all this different equipment and make it too ugly. Yeah.
Two questions. Questions one is, I previously heard some rumors saying that there could be just two houses available or eligible to access free phase for each street, or otherwise the grid might not be able to support that. Is it true? And if it is true, does that mean that it's actually a big limitation of our grid to do curbside charging? And like what you said, if going on to curbside charging, does that mean what sort of the boxes or equipment that we're talking about will be onto the pole?
Short answer to the first one is kind of like this little charging box. But again, we don't make or sell or install these. This is just what the New South Wales folk are using. I don't like commenting on rumours, but your point about not having enough for three-phase, I definitely haven't heard that. I think Upgrading to three-phase is a choice, and that costs money, and that cost is so that we can allow it. When it comes to the grid being able to handle things, I mean, you can always just keep building out the grid. Like if, you know, but there's always a price for those things, not just the cost of doing that, but also the opportunity cost. So if I looked at traditional network planning, if we look at the worst case scenario of EV take-up, like we said, you know, you've got your peak load, it could be added an extra 50% on our peak load because of EVs. So you could just say, right, that's our forecast. We're going to go and upgrade the whole network across the whole state to cater for that. That would take a lot of time, a lot of resources, and we're not being able to build other things instead. So the AER, the Australian Energy Regulator Chair, has a really good quote saying, you know, before you build more network, you have to use the network. So we actually have, I'm going to go all the way back to one of my first slides I didn't talk to. We actually have a lot, even though this might be the peak load time and the peak generation time, we have all this spare capacity in the middle of the day. So it's not about building more network or not being able to fit more in. It's more not about how much you use, but when you use it, really. So we have this much space for more EV charging in the middle of the day, essentially. So that might be all we have time for. No, that was it. I'll take one. Oh, one over there and maybe one over there.
I'm still getting 48 cents export. You don't like me, do you?
It's great,
so
it's
I
great.
want to charge in the middle of the day, so I charge 10 p.m. till 7 a.m. Is that a reasonable thing to do, or should we be actually charging in the early hours?
Depends what you're trying to achieve. If you want cheaper, then you should be exporting your solar and using in the middle of in the end of the day. But for the cost of a few dollars or a few cents, if you charge in the middle of the day, it's better for the grid. You're using more solar, so depends what you're trying to achieve there.
I was happy to accept the export dollars, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So 10 p.m. till 7 a.m., is that a reasonable time or not? It seems that's a cheap rate. That's the 8-cent rate.
Yeah.
And it
yeah.
surprises me because there's no solar helping out.
Yes, so if you look at SA Power Network's underlying tariff, our cheapest rate is in the middle of the day, 10 till 3, but the retailer have different price signals depending on various things. One of them could be that they might, if it's a national retailer, well, I think all of them are national, they might just look at all the prices across all the other 13 other networks and just take the average, or maybe they haven't caught up to the fact that it's cheaper in the middle of the day, it's too hard for them to change, or there's many other reasons why it's 8 cents in the evening. Also because, I don't have a slide here, but if you look at our generation, it's so easy to see, middle of the day, solar, cheaper in the middle of the day, easy. If you look at the other grids, they have their like coal baseload power, so it doesn't really matter for them what time of day, it's like almost the same. And they're trying, the cheap in the middle of the night is trying to avoid the peak in the middle of the day. Everyone's asleep, just please like shift there. So the pricing signals have changed based on like how the grid's changing, especially here. But good question. Maybe the last question over there. No, behind you. Yeah, did you have your hand up? No, I thought you did. Sorry? Oh, I have an e-scooter, like one of those illegal ones. Yeah. Yeah. It's a Ducati. It's a Ducati. Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Look, can't comment on that. It's a vehicle to grid demonstration. Yeah, no, I don't know anything about that. But that I hope so. But I haven't. Yeah. To be continued.
Could you please explain to me how
I'm scared.
supply charge is calculated? I use no electricity because it's all solar and everything else.
Yeah.
But my biggest expense is supply charge. Yeah. And that's going up dramatically all the time.
So, there's two things. One is I'm not an expert in pricing principles, unfortunately, but I can give a general comment. Again, the supply charge is also you'd get from your retailer. So there's the SA Power Networks component and the retailer component. So I'll just comment on the SA Power Networks component. The supply charge, you have your time of use pricing, which is meant to reflect how much it costs to send or receive electricity at that time. The supply charge is for operating the network. So there's a bushfire, we have to send crews out to restore supply. When the interconnector goes down, we have to send crews out to Olympic Dam and to people that are off-grid to restore their supply. You have to have people who are doing the billing and setting the billing. So the supply charge is meant to reflect how much it costs to operate the network. I'll also say our prices are regulated. So our prices are set by the AER, the Australian Energy Regulator. And so they take into consideration all of that. And you can probably find it online, like why things are priced the way they are, but it'd be like a 500-page document. Yeah. So we go back and forth with the retailer what all of our prices are for a 5-year period, and then they approve or don't approve them, and like negotiate them, and then we send that price to the retailer, and then the retailer will set your end price. It's also made up of other things, so that feed-in tariff that you're getting is actually added to the bill of every other customer. So that's why, yeah, I'm not a massive fan of that, because like the 40-cent supply, the premium feed-in tariff is actually shared across all customers that contribute to that. So I won't be sad in 2028 when that expires. Yeah. I feel so privileged to be here tonight, and thank you for all the really well-informed questions. Thank you. I hope I answered them sufficiently, but I'll probably come back in Feb or March just to do a guest update on some of the questions you asked about vehicle-to-grid uptake and curbside charging.
That sounds fabulous. Just say, we only, because we're a not-for-profit, we only have very small token thank you gifts. But you get one of our special key rings. I'm sure Bryn has a collection of paperweights, so now you can start too. And we really appreciate you coming in to